Welcome to this short executive knowledge lecture on topic 3, paper 2 of the SFC licensing exams. This topic covers management and supervision of securities businesses, and we'll be looking, as you can see on the screen, principally at the code of conduct, internal control guidelines, and some material on anti-money laundering. Now, I will emphasize the important points to help you understand the core material you need to notes at the exam. And as ever, a copy of the study notes that you can see on the screen can be downloaded from the Executive Knowledge website under Paper 2 Resources. And as ever, I strongly recommend that you supplement this lecture with practice questions for topic 3, paper 2, which can be found at Examinator.online. Now, as we can see, topic 3 covers 6 areas. First of all, we'll be looking at the duties and liabilities of responsible officers and executive officers. Remember, paper 2 is a responsible officer paper, so there's always likely to be something covering that area. Then we will look at the code of conduct for persons licensed by or registered with the SFC, and we'll pick out the salient features with regard to paper 2. Then management, supervision, and internal control guidelines. It's really the internal control guidelines that we'll consider, but we will focus on certain areas that are favourites at paper 2. Then we can look at the code requirements for licensed registered persons dealing in securities listed on traded on the stock exchange. All very wordy, sounds very grand. There's 2 elements there. It's the option client agreement and other requirements that relate to that. Then we will sort of go over in summary form prevention of money laundering, terrorist financing, and as is increasingly the case nowadays in the SFC materials, we will refer to some enforcement actions that have been added to topic 3. Okay, as I just said, this is a responsible officer paper, and so I think I would be comfortable with what the duties and liabilities of responsible officers are. And always remember, executive officers are the responsible officer equivalent for registered institutions, principally the banks. Now, we've listed there the requirements, the need to be fit and proper. Management liability, there it tells us, first bullet point, they're responsible officers, executive officers, and persons involved in management of a regulated business will be liable for misconduct of a licensed corporation. So the individuals themselves can be held liable when or where they consented, connived, or were neglectful in respect of misconduct. So that point lends itself very well to a sort of situational analysis question. We're then told that the ordinance gives details of liability for breaches of certain fundamental regulatory requirements. If we look at the first one there, where a regulated person is guilty of misconduct or is not fit and proper person, the SFC can revoke a license, prohibit further approval, and order the payment of a fine. Now remember this concept of being not fit and proper, that isn't enshrined in legislation. That will be with regard to breaches of codes, guidelines, etc. Some more material, it's fairly general. Read through it, and then we have there the general duties of management. Remember, licensed corporations should have at least 2 responsible officers approved by the SFC for each regulated activity. Now we come to the code of conduct. And the code of conduct does not have the force of law, but as it says there under section 2.1, a breach can lead to license suspension or revocation. I've mentioned that previously. And it can be, the code can be referred to in court legal proceedings, thereby giving it degree of a legal recognition. There are 9 general principles. Now, at Paper 2, are these 9 general principles all going to be examined? No. However, 1 or 2 maybe. So it's similar if you did paper 1, that you've got to be aware of them, and then, well, they may just dig deep into 1 or 2 and examine. So best way, read through this material and then do the practice questions to get up to speed. General principle 1, honesty and fairness. A lot of that material is self-evident. Principle 2, diligence. Paper 2, I'd be aware of some of the specifics here because they have come up in the questions. Let's just go through it. Licensed registered person should act with due skill, care, diligence, best interest of clients, and integrity of the market. Now, the practical examples that are given: prompt execution, client orders should be executed promptly. Best execution. Now, this has been examined. What do they mean by best execution? Client orders should be executed on the best available terms. It fairly straightforward. Nevertheless, we have seen that specifically examined. Prompt and fair allocation of client orders, and advice should be given to clients with due skill, care, and diligence. Separate accounts should be kept for each client for securities, for futures, cash, and margin accounts, and all orders should be time-stamped on receipt. That bullet point was examined, and the question was, when should client orders be time-stamped? And the answer is on receipt. With telephone orders centrally recorded, and the recording should be kept for 6 months. Now, it says here that the use of mobile phones for taking client orders is discouraged but not banned. Time of order receipt details should be recorded immediately. Now, one point that is not there is that if you use a mobile phone outside of the office to take an order, you must then submit details of the order into the internal office recording system as soon as possible. And that point has been raised. General principle 3, capabilities. Well, individuals must be have the skills and the competence to be able to carry out their duties. The last bullet point there, a licensed person who enters into non-centrally cleared OTC derivative transactions should implement proper risk management requirements and standards. That really sticks out on its own and has been added relatively recently. General principle 4, information about clients. This is the world of KYC, know your client, have details of their identity, their financial situation, strength, their experience, and their objectives. Read through that material. Many people are already having to deal with that in the field. Online platforms, that is something that is not regularly examined. But as you can see there, the guidelines on online distribution advisory platforms has been effective since April 2019. Client agreements, yes, you should enter into a client agreement before providing services to a client. And the agreement should be in Chinese or English, and there's more details. Practical procedures to set up an account, part of the way down page 8. Face-to-face account opening. Best way, however, if it's not possible, then you should get document certification, and that certification done by licensed person, just of the peace, bank manager, accountant, lawyer, notary, etc. And there are other points that you should be aware of. Online client onboarding. This is relatively new. So licensed registered person can onboard a client online via client's Hong Kong bank account and should obtain a client agreement signed by the client using an electronic signature with a copy of the client identity document. And this is a strange one, make a successful transfer an initial deposit of not less than 10,000 Hong Kong dollars from the client's Hong Kong bank account to the licensed registered person's bank account. And that's to ensure that the client's bank account is operating correctly. Okay, there's more material there on page 9. I'm not going to read through it, and obviously these lectures are not designed for this. Discretionary accounts, you should have an authority if you are operating the client's account with your discretion. General Principle 5, the information that you should provide to clients, and this is to provide an element of transparency. Now, General Principle 6, conflicts of interest. This is something that has a high chance of being covered in a question. You should try to avoid conflicts of interest between one client and another client, or between the client and the licensed person. You should try and avoid the conflict of interest. If you cannot, then you should inform the client of the conflict. Handling of client orders. Thing to remember here is that the client always has priority, whether it be in the orders or in the allocation. Priority over the intermediary and staff. Withdrawal of business there, licensed registered person ceasing to carry out regulated activity should promptly notify clients of the act. Be aware of that. Then we have material on soft dollars, connected transactions. Soft dollars are allowed, and the first sub-bullet point under rebates, etc., where the goods or services are of demonstrable benefit to the receiver's client, in which case you can go ahead. But there are only certain goods and services that are permitted. And remember, this is under conflict of interest. So anything that gives rise to potential conflict of interest is not permitted. And that appears at the bottom of page 11, from travel, accommodation, entertainment, all the way through to direct cash payments. What about cash rebates? Top of page 12. Intermediary may receive and retain cash or money rebates in relation to client transactions, provided. So it is allowed, provided clients consented in writing, brokerage rates not in excess of customary full service rates, and the rebates and their approximate values are disclosed to the client. Okay, let's move on to General Principle 7, compliance. And here we're reminded that while we're covering all these rules, regulations, codes, guidelines, the licensed registered person must comply with them. Indeed, we've grouped in 4 bullet points there what you must comply with. Primary and subsidiary legislation, rules, regulations, and codes that are administered by the SFC, rules of the exchanges and the clearinghouses if you are an exchange participant. We will cover that in topic 4, and requirements of any other regulatory bodies. Now, what about employee dealings? Are they permitted? They are permitted, but there must be a written policy outlining the circumstances in which employees can trade, and the bullet points at the bottom of page 12 just further detail the situations that must exist for employee dealing. Complaints, the important word with complaints is prompt. So complaints should be handled timely, appropriate manner, investigated and responded to promptly. Not surprisingly, intermediaries are responsible for the acts of the employees. And then we group in 4 points the notification that must be made to the SFC, and this is worth just remembering. A licensed registered person is required to make reports to the SFC immediately on discovering material breaches or suspected material breaches of any law, regulation, or code, insolvency situations affecting it, substantial shareholders or directors, any disciplinary actions taken against it, and material problems with business systems and equipment. In any of those situations, you must notify the SFC, and that has to be in writing and immediate. General Principle 8, client assets. This is broader than the 2 rules that we saw in topic 2, the client securities rules and the client money, because those are the principal client assets. Here, it's much broader. It says the client assets promptly, properly accounted for. and the client assets should be adequately safeguarded. But as I've pointed out, there's a lot more specific points in the client securities rules, the client money rules. Now, General Principle 9, responsibilities of senior management. Now, senior management are seen as responsible for ensuring maintenance of the standards of conduct, adherence to all the proper procedures. And as it says there, senior management are expected to properly manage the risks associated with the business. Last bullet point, page 13, tells us senior management should have access to all information about the business on timely business and about business on a timely basis. That shouldn't be business on a timely basis, and necessary advice on their own responsibilities. Now, they brought in a new concept some time ago, and that is the concept of manager in charge. If we look at the top of page 14, who are senior management? Well, they list the points. All directors, including shadow directors, and we covered shadow directors in topic 1. Responsible officers are considered to be senior management. And then any individual who is manager in charge for one or more of the following functions. Now, the issue with manager in charge is that they don't necessarily need to be licensed, and they may not be a responsible officer, but they are brought into this category of senior management and therefore must behave accordingly. Now, we have overall management oversight, key business line. Now, that's the managers involved in that. And then operational control and review, risk management, finance and accounting, information technology, compliance and anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing. Now, if you are a manager in charge of those areas, you're not necessarily carrying out a regulated activity. Therefore, you don't need to be licensed. But what this principle is saying now is that these individuals are considered to be senior management and must act accordingly. The SFC wants to know who the managers are in charge, and it should be pointed out that the first two that have asterisks beside them, they must also be responsible officers. So your CEOs, your COOs, now that's the first point, must be responsible officers, therefore must be licensed, as well as those that are involved in the management of a key business line. Otherwise, the others come under the category of senior management, but don't need to be licensed, nor do they need to be responsible officers. There are a number of conditions which are listed in the middle of the page. So those are the nine general principles of the Code of Conduct. As I've said, read through them, do the questions. Technically, it's not difficult. People feel reasonably comfortable with this material, but you've just got to remember the specific details that the SFC believe are important. Number of questions, probably 2, maybe 3. So I wouldn't spend a long time trying to memorize any of that material, but I would do the questions to get it into my short-term memory.